Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Lee Swan Bolden, and today we're going to be talking about transitioning from 2D CAD and SketchUp to BIM. If you have any questions, I will have my information at the end. But a couple things before we jump into the presentation. Firstly, this presentation is copyrighted. If you have any questions or would like something from this presentation, feel free to reach out. Secondly, if you're having trouble hearing, please be sure to check your computer audio, or if you are connecting by phone, that you do enter your PIN that was given to you in your GoToMeeting log on. So just be aware here. I'm going to check before we get started to see if anyone is having any specific issues, but please check your audio. You should be hearing me now. Today's presentation is for one AIA CEU unit. We are a registered provider with the American Institute of Architects. And please enter your information in the chat window. And I'm going to ask a couple times during this presentation. If you guys have that, please enter it within the dialog box. Now, I just want to introduce something for you. This webinar series is a part of 3 webinars for CEU credits. The next one will be October 29th, which you can register for, and that Small Firms Do It Better with BIM, and this information will be shown again. And I also just want to introduce you to a special promotion that we have for ALA members. Until December 31st, we will be offering 25% off of ArchiCAD and ArchiCAD Solo Perpetual licenses, and that also includes 4 complimentary online training sessions. So we want to make sure if you get into ArchiCAD that you have the steps necessary to move forward. This contact information will be shown again. My partner, Eric Coughlin, can be reached if you need a specific quote. And thank you for joining me here today. So, a little bit about Graphisoft. We are a BIM company and have been for about 34 years now. And our very first release actually was with actual windows and doors, and so this has been a long time of us developing BIM, and it's a software that has been developed by architects for architects and designers, and you're going to see a lot of that flexibility in how we design here today. We also work on both platforms. So if you have a Mac or a PC or Android or iPhone, we do work on both platforms. In fact, if you're in an office with mixed computers, everyone can work together and collaborate on the same project. Now, today we're going to be talking about what that means to transition from 2D and SketchUp to BIM. So we're going to be learning about the different levels of BIM and also talking about some of the inefficiencies and cost implications from working in some of the multiple applications and some of the popular workflows in the industry here today. So in this BIM software, you will be able to continue in a single environment from schematic design and construction documents. And of course, we'll be able to see some of those benefits of firms that are using these BIM applications and talk a little bit about that. And once again, before we get started, please be sure to type your AIA membership number in the chat box. And after this presentation, in a couple days or so, we will be mailing you a certificate for that. And then lastly, we will be going through some things. We do have a help center, a YouTube channel, mini guides, places for help. But if you have any questions, you can check out Help Center at helpcenter.graphisoft.com, or within the help menu, there are links to some of our sites and information that are available. So let's jump right in. I didn't see anyone have any issues with the audio, so let's go ahead and get started. So I want to start with the interface, differences between ArchiCAD and AutoCAD. So what you're looking at now is exactly what you'll see when you open the box, so to speak. On the left-hand side, we have our tools, which are currently divided into design and document and more. And right now I have it in a single icon mode, but we can always show the full names of these tools. And once I select a tool, this top uh, bar will populate. This is called my info bar. So if I'm going to draw with a wall, the first thing I'm going to see is the icon for that, what layer it goes on, various methods of drawing, and then what type of wall we're looking at in thickness and height. And we'll come back to some of these things during our presentation. On the right-hand side here, we have the navigator, and it really is the core of how we work in ArchiCAD and how we're able to be so efficient in creating so many drawings. So aside from what I've created from our presentation here today, you'll see that we have pretty much made this so that you are prepared both for schematic design and your construction documents and your design development set. So we will return here. But the idea with this navigator is that the first tab, every project consists of these things. I know when I'm going to build a project, there are going to be stories, elevations, and sections, etc. And then I need to filter that because I need to see more than just one first floor, right? So I'm going to have first floor schematic, maybe first floor for my CDs, first floor electrical and demo. And so what happens in this tab is that we begin to filter the model by going into the settings, customizing the names and certain information, and then making changes so that it appears differently on different sets of plans. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on as well. Now, this third tab here is my layout book, and this would be similar to your paper space, but it's a lot more detailed as far as how we're able to set it up. So if we can go and take a look at a single sheet and what's happening here, you can double click here, or if it's open in the tab heading, you can click here. But as soon as we draw information and continuously draw, it will be updating on these sheets. And there are a lot of things that we can take advantage of, such as our automatic numbering. When we create our section drawings, for instance, right now, these are pre-placed. And just a preview into what happens with our template is that the goal is that, you're going to take most drawings that you use most of the time and include them in pre-placing them so that when you build them, they will populate. So for instance, our elevations are on drawing 1 on A301. Our sections and elevation, these markers are pre-placed, and what you'll find is that if there is a change, for instance, I will be able to make that change, right? So if my elevation drawing, just to give you a preview into where we're headed, if that drawing switches or I switch my page number, it's going to renumber itself here, but it's also going to renumber itself within our set, right? So you always have this changing information that will be updating as you move it throughout your drawing. Now this fourth and last tab is my publisher. So when it's time to export this and produce our deliverable, you will be able to export this to 3D renders. We have an integrated rendering program, CinderRender, not a program, but integrated within to ArchiCAD. We have BIMX, which I'll talk about last. You can export your export your project, both 2D and 3D documentation to your phone or tablet. And DWGs, of course, if you're going to be working with consultants who may need them or you need backgrounds that you need to release. IFC is the format that we use to communicate between BIM software. So it's an information-rich geometry that BIM software is used to communicate. If you happen to be collaborating with anyone using Revit MEP, Revit Structure, Bentley, those type of systems, this is the file format we're going to use to speak to each other. And then lastly, PDFs. If you want to do more of an archive set, PDF and DWGs, and also to your printer. So we're really setting you up. So all you have to do is come in here and get started drawing. So as far as our interface, we're going to be doing a lot of work here, very similar to what your ribbon would entail in AutoCAD. And this info bar, like I said, I gave you a preview, but it's going to change depending on the tool and offer settings for those particular views. So one thing just to start, general overview with similarities between ArchiCAD and AutoCAD, for instance, we do have layers. So we have layers and then we have layer combinations, similar to our layer grouping. And we'll talk a little bit about that, but that's how we start to control what shows up on these views. We can say, okay, on a presentation plan, please show all the furniture and accessories. But if it's going to be for construction documents, only show pertinent informations, dimensions, our openings and more detailed information. So that's something that is very similar. And we talked a little bit about the navigator, but I just want to kind of reiterate that point because it's preparing you, excuse me, it is preparing you for, your project where a lot of the information is already set. We're going to come and we're going to design this model and extract all of the documentation from it. So I want to start with one of the standard things you might do when starting a file. And it's also first way to talk about how do we actually import DWGs into our software. So I'm going to go to my layout book here, and what we have up here already is our first floor plan. So just a little bit of reading, kind of understanding what's actually happening. When I'm looking at this first floor plan sheet, it is using a master sheet of our ArcD architectural. So these masters can be customized. It's really not a big deal. If you want to create your own custom title blocks, you can edit some of the information that's here. One large part of how we are more successful and efficient with changes is through this auto text. So things like project name and standard information that needs to carry through our set, what could happen is I can enter it in one place, right? So I'm going to enter it here, and then that's going to update anywhere that I'm requesting that information. So if we're creating a new master, just what that looks like, I can bring in my new master, and I'm going to name it. So we could call this 24 by 36. Choose from either any of these sizes or even custom sizes in case you're printing, boards for presentation purposes. You could do that. But now we've created that, and we can set this up with a grid or set this up to be the default for new layers. So when we create this, all it takes, and if you're getting started here, you want to start to see how this develops in terms of your plan, bring in your title block, and you could do that simply by dragging and dropping it. And when you do that, it's going to ask me about scale. Usually 1 inch is great, but we're going to place this element. These are files that you can attach to it that can offer you more control over fonts and values here, but we're going to bring this title block in, and we'll talk a little bit about this when we get back in terms of what it means to bring in drawings. But one thing we are going to do in order to edit and customize some of the information is to right click on it and explode this drawing. And excuse me, at that point I can choose whether I want to keep this original, and this also gives you an opportunity to bring in your layering system if you need to do that as well. So I'm going to use the drawings layer. It's just a generic layer I have here, and I'm going to press OK. And the original we could click on and delete, and so we want to get rid of title block information because this is just what we're going to, to use as our master. So one thing we want to do just to get started, once again, talking about the auto text, the automation of our set, places where there's small changes when we have room for error, instead of having a page number where we can just label it automatically, I could use things like my auto text so that when there is a change in my layout, that stuff can update properly. So when you do bring in your title block, you do want to take out some of the typed information, just plain type text, and then enter in some of the information like project name, ID, address, client information, etc. So already getting started, we brought in our title block, and all it takes for us to use it is to switch the title block that we select, and then that information becomes available, and we can see things like my name, my project name, and sheet number have been updated automatically. So these are just things that we can do to get started right away. and already we are more efficient. So there are lots of options for bringing in DWGs. Drag and drop is definitely the simplest, but we have information on the best way to bring in a DWG because there will be different options depending on what you want to do. But once again, drag and drop is a great and easy option in order to do that. And so I want to just start here because we're about to jump into our modeling. When you bring in these drawings, what are we using them for? You might bring in an existing DWG so that you could begin working in ArchiCAD, and we're going to talk about this trace reference feature that will allow you to create an underlay for your design. So let's go ahead and get started within our modeling here. And I'm going to go to my project map. And first, I'm just going to start a worksheet. And these are great for importing things. And it allows me to organize it separately away from my drawing. So when I bring in a DWG, this doesn't, of course, have to be named according to the type, but this reference ID is for you, kind of an internal organization system. But if I just want to bring in one of my DWGs and I have some files up here, what that workflow might look like is actually you're going to take, oops, not my title block. You can take a house, for instance, and you can drag and drop that element in. It's going to ask you about scale, and you can go ahead and place that. And it comes in as what you might know as a block. But even as a block, I can access the points, which means if I'm working with, any consultants and I need to align my drawings, I can use those points. But once again, I can always right-click and explode this into the view for my usage. And it's going to explode it into lines and elements here. So what do I do with this? I have this placed here in my worksheet. I'm just going to move it here. But what can happen is I can use that as a part of my trace reference. So a trace reference is very similar to my yellow roller trace. I can right click on elements here in the tab heading or right click on them in the navigator in order to show it as a trace reference. And I get this grayed out element beyond that I can go in and start drawing. And so just a preview, I can start with my wall tool, which right now is going to an exterior layer. We have all these types of methods so that you can draw essentially whatever you like. Even though I'm in drawing mode, if I need to switch a width or height or an element, I can switch that information on the fly. And then what you'll notice is, you're going to be possibly tracing right in this element, and we can change the thickness of this wall. But at any time when you're drawing this, and I don't want to draw this entire structure here, you can always switch between different geometries. You don't have to exit the tool and come back. And then you can also use backspace in order to, go back to the last mode in that line in case you've made any errors. So right away, just these basic walls, if I can see them here, I just capped it off for the sake of just the example, but it always appears in 3D, which the shortcut is F3, and we can return into our 3D window. So at all times we're developing, we can draw in any of these environments. I'm also going to talk about massing, kind of your SketchUp workflow. But one thing, if you do use these, is that, this is what is called a generic wall. And then this wall can be transitioned, the single wall, without deleting it, into other more defined elements within my project. So it really just keeps me so that I'm not really worrying about what's developing. From a preliminary standpoint, we've only done a couple things, but that information appears within my floor plan views. I have my 3D model, and everything will be updating simultaneously. So I want to return there because that's just one workflow. And even with this trace and reference, which I really love, once again, just harkens back to, using my yellow roller trace and kind of overlaying my ideas. You can always turn the opacity of the active layer down so that if you do need to place a window, for instance, maybe you just pop it in here, but you can always either stretch it or provide dimensions as needed in order to start to define your model more clearly, right? So at any time, all of this information is here. And then we also have these differentiations between schematic and more defined models. So right now that window is showing as kind of a simplified opening. However, through certain of these changes, and we're going to touch on this a little bit, but as I start to develop some of these information, I can show it more defined or less defined using what I call model view options. And so those are, I can show my window with a single wall, or I can show it as a part of my elements there. So I could show it just as a single line, or I could show it with all of my casing that is available. So one of the beauties of kind of working with these intelligent components. Now that's fine. I want to show you another way as well. So this is about 2D and SketchUp workflows. So you might have a different option. Let's just say that you start with a sketch, or you start with any of your ideas. So we could also start a worksheet and import, JPEGs, PDFs, PNGs, various formats for how you might develop that information. So, we want to start to use this as a single platform, and that's where we're headed. Where ideas, supplemental information, all of that can be brought within the project, right? So, if you even wanted to show within a presentation, much like I'm doing here today, as far as oh, sorry, that's the uh, wrong file type here. When we bring any of these elements in, I can always start to, sorry, I think I've brought in some of my wrong files here. But no matter what my ideas are, I can always just drag and drop them into ArchiCAD for use, right? So however you start your project, you can still start to do that. Bring in maybe as-built scans, or ideas about how you're actually going to be working. So from this standpoint, if you do bring these elements in, what you can use is our morph tool. And our morph tool allows me to build in a very schematic way, right? So right now we have this relationship diagram. Just a little bit about our morph tool. In SketchUp, what you'll be doing is, drawing individual lines and faces and components, and then you need to group them possibly for layers or labels, or to show or hide different information at a time. So through this process, there is possibility for loss. I don't know about you, but there always comes a point where I'm like, where did I lose that face? I deleted that line, and I'm not sure when. And so what the difference is with our morph tools, that it offers you more discipline, and there's some information that you can actually get from it. So I'm going to start with our morph tool, but we're going to also take a look at our pet palette, which allows us to switch between these many different methods. So what that looks like, if we wanted to use that first drawing that we were looking at as a trace reference. This time I'm in my floor plan view. I can use that sketch as a trace reference, and trace references can be moved. Anything can be a trace reference. As a matter of fact, just to look ahead, if you wanted to understand if this actually fit on a sheet, you can place your layout as a trace reference to start to see how it's actually overlaid in that environment. So just many different options for how you can start to develop your plans. And once again, this trace reference can be used in either one of these tabs in any environment. So what that looks like from a model building perspective, we have our morph tool. We have these different methods. I'm right now just going to build a face. But let's say, I want to represent this mass here, and I just built that one. But if it was about me defining actual dimensions, you can use like special guidelines to help me do that. And if I wanted to be more specific, for instance, make this mass 15 feet by 38 feet, I'm going to enter that information here. And right now we're just creating kind of like those beginning entry masses, but we could use things like guidelines while we're in a 2D format to help me align with any of these elements. And once again, if there are any dimensions, I'm just going to type and add them as available. And so this is a sketch, but if you start from a sketch or you start with a sketch that actually is to scale, then more work, of course, is being done within that environment. And so if you just want to understand masses from a space perspective or interdimensions, you can always do any of those things. So like even when we're building, and let's say we want to build a mass here, we can always switch between our different geometries. Does not have to be a rectangle. You're never limited in any of the geometry that you create. And right now, let's just say it. I mean, this is a specific workflow, working from 2D to 3D. But what we could do with these masses is start to add heights to it, right? So if I want to say, okay, this mass is actually going to be 20 feet, I can type that there. I can also just use this kind of push and pull to match things as they are available. But once again, if there are any dimensions, you're going to type those elements to have that information play out. And right now, for that, what we see is like a circulation corridor. Maybe that's a little bit lower, a little bit higher, but we're starting to see information about our project. And right now, we're not showing much information. But just from a workflow perspective, if you wanted to get ideas of about what materials are, and ArchiCAD comes with well over, I don't know, 1,000 surfaces, you can start to bring them into your project, and some of them are already integrated in the projects. Others you could just click on to add them within your library, and this will allow you to perhaps start getting some ideas of materiality as we move through our project. So one of the things about this workflow in particular, from the standpoint of not having to create very much information early, is the changes that we can make and how efficient we can be in those changes. So one of the things that I'm hearing more from the industry, maybe you are actually experiencing, is that some of the inefficiencies with 2D is that, okay, when I make a change, I need to make sure that I update all of the drawings that affects. So for instance, if you change a window, I got to change that everywhere, right? But then I also need to update the drawings and the model. And so the inefficiency between carrying these two elements comes into play. So one thing, even at a schematic level, just to show you, and I've included, very different surfaces. And if your clients are anything like everyone else's nowadays, the ability to see changes early is very important. I can select these elements, and if I want to, change out my surfaces, I could use my surface painter here to select the surface that I like. Maybe I want to paint it something else completely. We have our white brick here. I'm in Chicago, so I'm always painting with brick. But with this brick, I can choose the surface that I want, and then either hover to kind of see a preview of what that's going to look like in my model, or very quickly just click to replace that information in my model. So what this allows me to do is be very flexible even in the beginning. And even though this is just a mask with a surface applied to it, let's take a look at our elevations. They also pick up information at this very schematic level. So a lot of information, even from using this one morph. And we can change the functionality. I'll go into like the push and pull aspects of it. But what's really important about BIM and kind of this shift in thinking is that there's information that is available immediately. So one of the things I just want to bring in, I always like to show you how I'm doing it. Of course, I could have had this done before the demo, but schedules are things that are happening automatically. Door and window schedules, we don't have any yet, but just to show you from the morph perspective, what you can do is say, okay, give me a list of all the morphs. Maybe you have entered some information based off of an ID or something, but we can build a table that tells me information, right? So ID is something I'm going to enter here. Maybe you want to understand volume or area. And right away, I can have that information play out here. I'm going to have to do some cleaning up in terms of how this actually appears. But maybe you want to know, which one of those morphs maybe, and these tables are always, changing in terms of I can change it here, it updates in the model, right? So, maybe this is my bedroom masses, right? And, maybe these are my living areas. And you can see already it's updating everything in the model. I can start to get some preliminary ideas so that even in a programming in simplistic mode, I have smart information that is being developed for me. So a little bit of shift in how we're working, but we are developing so much information all at the same time, even at this massing standpoint. So what you might end up doing with this, you already saw a preview of walls, which we talked about just with the DWG, but even in using this mass and what we can do with it, I built that from a plan, but I also just want to show you, if you're in 3D, this time you can always go into a box mode, push and pull that, and just things you're already familiar with. If you're using a SketchUp workflow, you can select the face, and maybe you want to go into what we call a tube mode, very similar to a follow me mode, and you can continue drawing still very freely. So, we use this morph tool for object creation, as well as for to explode elements. So we'll talk a little bit about, bringing in SketchUp elements as well. One of the things we definitely shine at is the interoperability, the many different file types that we can import and export. And so you still can benefit from any of the ways that you may have been used to modeling, right? So we can always go in, maybe add faces, push and pull, and this information is disseminating everywhere, right? It's going into my elevations, my plans, everywhere that it needs to be. Now, where we really start to shine here, massing is great. We can always work in that format, but it's the information that we want. So at some point, you're going to want to come from this schematic design mode, kind of massing mode, and then go into walls. And the way we're able to do that is we have different wall types. We have a basic wall, we have a composite wall that has more information, and then we have even complex profiles, which you might use for any of your detailing. So for some of the popular things that we hear in myths about BIM is that, okay, I can't design what I want. And the types of shapes that we can create, we can be very flexible with any of those geometries. Once again, it's never a matter of like where I am. So if you're very comfortable in a 3D format, you can always just draw in 3D mode. But do know that all of that information is being updated everywhere, right? So that's the basic idea. Now, I want to, just talk about what we have here. Say we're developing this project. Where do we move next? So I have my wall tool. These are currently going to be going to my wall exterior layer, and I'm just going to start it off with my generic wall. And so what you could do is use what is called a magic wand. And if I hold my space bar and click, what it is doing is tracing these elements, and it's going to trace it to the height of the level. So let's just say I want to add in, and maybe I'm just building my first story based upon this. I can space bar and click to add in these walls, and they're going to different layers. So what's going to happen is I will be able to just extrude or get rid of those elements. And you'll see if you want to build on top, you could do that, right? So you have a lot of flexibility in how you can use this tool, both in a 3D, and let me just turn off this surface painter so we have more space here. You can always do that within the 3D environment, but once again, if you're filling in blanks or you just want to draw from a 2D environment, you can do this as well. And that's one of the things just I want to mention in the training that we do, and we have a very hands-on approach, and we often start with 2D methods because the same way that I draw a line is the same way I'm going to draw a wall, right? So I can draw this line, a single line, uh, right, or a chain line and continue going with that. And this pet palette is one of those things that allows me to switch between those geometries, but I can also do the same thing with my other tools, right? So draw a single wall or draw and switch my geometry as well. So really creative. And even if you're thinking about tracing lines that you've drawn, you can use that magic wand, that space bar and click in order to incorporate that into my model. So let's begin to develop this a bit further. We have some walls here. Where's that height coming from? Once again, just speaking about changes. And what I'll do is turn on a great palette that I like, and I provide you, always with many different tips diagrams. We want you to know what's heading, right? But we can turn that layer off in terms of our massing so that we can just begin to focus on our model. Now, what we're doing here, let's say there's a change, and we haven't talked about where this height is actually coming from. These stories are set up, and we can always make the change. And this is where we become, more and more efficient, right? The changes that we make. So if there's a floor-to-floor height change, maybe I could change it here, right? I could change it within my story settings. Maybe this becomes our 14 feet here. And then my walls and other elements that are connected to that are also going to grow to that height, that elevation that we were looking at right now. And we'll just give it a second to update. And so between these views, you could always keep those elements on or off, but you can see the story height here has changed. My markers have updated, and these are just small things that help me avoid some of the costly errors that can happen in construction documents from the changes that we made. So let's begin to develop this a little bit further. When we are incorporating our walls, notice I haven't gone into a settings box, and that's really just to debunk myths. I can come in here and just draw and just design, but of course there's settings for all of these tools where I can affect the thickness, the height of these elements, and the composition and how they're actually created. So just know that these elements are available. And a large part of how we work through the many different wall types that we have and the many elements that we have is through favorites. So for instance, we have these walls here, and I'll go to 3D because I like you to be able to see the change, right? When we are looking at any of these elements, we can always introduce more information. So like this is a single wall, just a blank wall. Let's say you knew what was happening next, or maybe early in the project you knew what type of wall this would be. You can transition this single generic wall into a composite wall, one that knows what it is. So for instance, I'm going to change this to wall wood 5.5. So that's my framing member with my masonry and gyp. Let's try that. And what you'll notice is that that information has updated here. That information is also updated here. But right now we're looking at the schematic plan. So once again, what are we doing? Making you more efficient. This is the schematic plan. It shows up in this kind of pochade mode, with my complete pochade. However, when it comes to getting ready for construction documents or communicating that information has updated here, right? That information has updated everywhere. And I just changed all these walls, but, kind of workflow changes, we can always, split walls and then change their geometry, right? So this wall could could actually become, one of my gyp wall elements, and we can always change our connections and intersections. And so it's making me more intelligent, but I'm also changing, one bit of information everywhere. And we can use things like similar to match properties in CAD, where you can pick up the properties of something and then inject it into it. And so what we want to avoid is you having to delete and redraft, which you definitely can do. You always have that option if that's how you want to work. But we are refining this model kind of within several steps, as opposed to kind of breaking the workflow. Oh, I got to change my 2D. Oops, I got to go back and change my 3D. And then I need to make sure also that my documentation is in place. And so there's a lot that we could do just from building this model in this fashion. And as far as like alignment and things, just kind of showing you how efficient we are. If I wanted to change where this wall actually lives. First off, we have this thing called a reference line. You could flip it if you want to, if you're looking for more of a different approach with this, but you can also begin to offset my edges. I can begin to offset my edges in order to match my drawing as necessary, right? So just wanted to show you there are many different ways that people get started and start to develop this model. Once again, I've kind of used what was there. If you want to delete it, you definitely can. But these favorites is where I was going, where you have certain different wall types that you're going to use traditionally over and over again. And so you can also select and coordinate your favorites so that if you just want to draw that, you can, right? And we see things like the building materials joining, or I can trim pieces of the walls away and actually change any of my intersections. So it's a really flexible program as far as like how you work. And it's kind of the best of both worlds where, yes, I'm going to draw, but I also can use this kind of push and pull offset mode in order to make some of the changes that I might need to in my project. So very, very clear about how we work and trim and develop our model into what we're looking at. And so if we could talk very briefly about our windows and doors. For instance, I have a full library of doors, but if I just want to place a door, I can come in, find the center point of that wall, and then click to place this, and we can affect the swing of it. And then these two have favorites. And so once again, what are the things that you like to do most when you're developing your model? We can definitely benefit from that. And if we're just using this, they are coming in with markers that can go into our door schedules. And that's where information rich can become. And I've set this up, and right now it says DO1. But guess what? If this is DO2, it's going to change my marker. And I can change the appearance of this as far as like whether I want to show my heights or not. But where we becoming more efficient, there's all of this information in the background, right? Schedules, that's a place where we take time to build it. Here are my schedules, right? If I want to add some dimensions to it, I can add that dimension into my schedule, and it doesn't have to be everything, right? There's all of this information that's available. Whether or not you use it definitely is up to you, but the fact that it's building in the background, kind of preparing me for all the documentation, is where we become so much more efficient. So I'm going to build some windows in here. And once again, we can either place those. I place those first ones at the center, but you can also be very specific and say, okay, I want to make sure that this window is, maybe this is your intention, right? That whatever window that you build is always 5 feet from the corner, right? And so what this means is right now I can choose this window, but what if this window changes? If this window happens to change to be a different window, which we have, standard sizes, but you'll see it kept that anchor point. It kept all of that information in play for me. And even from a 3D perspective, as far as model development and how we work, we see this window. Well, right now it's showing without some of the features, but our libraries, windows and doors and objects are very parametric. So that means I can see what this looks like in plan elevation in 3D. And I'm just going to toggle through some of these values, but all of our menus are very intuitive. It says, what do you want to change? Give me a graphic to represent what I'm actually changing. We have custom sashes. You can add some of your own sashes. You can add an arc on it if you want to. And so we're trying to make sure that we are keeping all of this information together. But once again, changes, being more efficient, deciding where I might show this information. And you don't have to do this every time. I just wanted to give you a sample of it. But in saving your own favorites, that means, you can go to this little star and say, okay, this is my casement window. And this also, um, and you could be as specific as you want. But it helps with office standards. What I don't want is to say window one, because nobody knows what that actually is. So that means that, okay, I've edited this single window and brought it in, but anytime I go to place a new window, I can also benefit from that favorite that I created. And I actually didn't put it in the folder, but you can just double click to place this element in 3D or in 2D. So I just want to build out my windows here so we can talk a little bit about annotating and this multiply command. Great way to get started. You can begin to play out patterns, right? So this first one is one where you choose the spacing and then you can build as many windows you want at that same spacing, right? So it's a very dynamic in how we actually operate. And I'm going to, also going to just to be entering some other windows so that when we take a look at our schedules, they also have information within our elevation as well. And so I'm really coming here to show you as defined as you want to be early in the project, you can be. And I think that's one of the things that I'm hearing. And even personally, we like SketchUp because of the flexibility that it offers. But when we have to break our workflow in order to get into construction documents, we're losing time. We may be losing information. We may be, setting ourselves up where, think about it, HGTV, how have they spoiled our clients so much? They want to see changes all the time. And so, when you tell them, oh, I have my drawings, but I haven't updated the 3D model, they don't understand that, right? But we can begin to introduce any of these elements, once again, in a 2D or in a 3D format in order to be able to just create more variation in our plans, but still benefit from the things that we like about our tools, the ability just to build very flexibly and choose from some of these different elements. And our libraries are very parametric, and this is a large part of how we keep our file sizes very small in comparison to some other softwares as well. So really, I'm just doing this so that when we take a look at our elevations, they don't look so blank. So just bear with me as I place a couple windows. And once again, even in 3D, those little things that help me, those 3D markers that help me find the midpoint in that wall, or, using those hot spots once again in order to help me develop my ideas while I'm actually drawing and keep my intention in place, right? How do you want to design? How can we be more efficient doing that way? And here's the bonus, right? We know that all of my elevations are forming. They're picking up information. Even the openings of these doors are available and making me more efficient. So with the time we have left, let's continue to develop this model now that we've talked a little bit about workflow, how you might begin to design in any of these views. So if I go to a plan view, and I'll just turn my trace reference off. But when we're developing any of these elements, we can always start to build more interior walls or, any of these elements. Once again, using those favorites perhaps as an advantage for you. And I just want to add in a couple of spaces. During these demos, it's not me developing the most beautiful project in the world. It's me showing you exactly how this tool works and what that entails when you're working with any of these elements. And so one little thing here with these composites, if you're wondering how do we create these composites and edit them, we have a list. We offer you some, obviously, but you can build these. And so, right now, this structure is show with installation. Talk about one-click changes. If I don't want to show it with that, I can turn that off. It's going to update everywhere within my project. Or if there's an instance where, okay, I've had a change in the project, I need to insert or add more material, and I'm just going to set it up to be generic so we can see this, but I can make this change here, and then that change is going to update everywhere, right? So that's where we become more efficient in all of the things we do. And these are for floor slabs and walls and roofs and some of our other tools as well. Sorry, I just want to remove that because that doesn't belong there. Um, and so we're always updating our model. Now, if we want to develop this further, and I just want to place a couple doors within the space, and I'll just choose my single 4-panel door and make sure that these rooms actually play out as rooms. So when we're developing any of these elements, same iteration in terms of clicking, placing. If you're worrying about numbering, right now they're going sequentially, but we can also set this up so that each door is a particular type. So magic wand, right? We could build our slab and I could trace this entire shape. Much like we started drawing, we have these different geometry methods that I can switch between. However, that magic wand really becomes key for me, right? I can use that to hold that to spacebar and click to automatically trace that element. And if we go to 3D just to identify, no matter what that shape is, it's going to create that floor slab. And when we're building our second story, we have two options of going about doing that, right? We can use that first floor as a trace reference again, perhaps pick up properties from whatever is going on below so that you can begin to draw with it, right? And so you still can benefit from like a typical workflow of what you might use with overlaying and understanding things, which means that I can draw this entire thing. But also, if there's any repetition in your plans, perhaps like multifamily or larger commercial projects where some of the floor plates are similar, we can also benefit from something that says, hey, please copy everything up from the first floor to the second floor. And that could be everything. I'm going to do everything at once. But there's a couple things I want you to be aware of with this, right? So one, our doors are connected to our wall. So in these cases, I either want to build a balcony or get rid of that door. And just to show you what that looks like, if you are building a balcony, maybe it's selecting that slab in 3D and simply offsetting the edge. And then we have various other tools. We have our railing tool, and you can start to see how flexible we are. We can change the type of railing that's included with it. But once again, in other iterations, maybe it's not about a balcony. You want to delete that and perhaps replace it with a window that already exists within your environment. So you have options with in regards to how you actually go about creating any of these elements. Now, secondly, there's the intersections that are happening are working based off of our building materials in these composites. So I copied up, we didn't talk about it, but that my first floor was concrete and gravel. Well, the gravel doesn't belong here, we know for sure, or maybe the concrete. But what you'll find is intelligence in when we actually go about switching these elements. So if I switch this to be a wood floor with gyp on the bottom being the ceiling for what's actually beneath, you'll notice that concrete does not then punch through and it kind of corrects the connection in regards to how we're actually working. So when we want to continue this even further, maybe let's go to our roof tool. And once again, the flexibility and how we design is always up to you. And what's great about this tool in general, I could draw absolutely anything. I don't have the budget for this, but I can draw anything and it's going to figure out a roof for me. So for those of you who think that BIM is supposed to limit your design creativity, it's just totally untrue. I can draw whatever I'm looking for. But when I go to my roof tool, my roof level, I can also use that magic wand here, which can be very valuable and save me time. And it's a trace tool in terms of it's looking for boundaries. So sometimes it does kind of get jogged on one or single line here. But you'll notice that if I simply go about tracing this, and let's be frank, right now we can use the outside face, but you can also kind of draw it as you would, right? The idea is that you're going to build this as you would in real life. And so as I'm moving around the building here, and just let me finish up these corners, it's going to figure out the geometry that's best based upon the shape that I'm drawing. But if I just want to draw it one pane at a time, each roof plane at a time, I can do that as well. So you always have options in how you create, what you create, and how you go about drawing it here. So let me just wrap up this roof. I drew quite a large structure here, but what you'll notice is when I get back to the beginning, all right, there comes my roof structure, and it figures out the roof base. Oops, and I actually placed it 10 feet above. Oh, no, it's because I have a roof level in the third story. But once again, those changes, very quick fix. just for the sake of time, I'm going to build a 2-story building instead of our 3-story building. I can delete that and say, hey, you're going to delete that story, but it's going to adjust my model accordingly, right? So very flexible. And if there are any changes that need to be made, pitch wise, it's going to update that information everywhere. So getting into our annotation, just like everything else, of course, you can go in and set up our dimensions, right? You can set up a point, you can dimension a single wall just by clicking on it if you want to, which that may not be what I want to do, but I'm just saying that you can start your own dimension string. You can add, you can dimension a single point, but you can also take this dimension string and perhaps add on to it, right? So this idea of the continuous string we can begin to develop in this fashion based upon where we click on the structure. And that's always a possibility. I also just want to show you our quote unquote easy button, right? So I can also select this entire structure. And what we'll do, I want to select just my walls here. So I can select Command A or Control A, select all of my walls, and then I can say, hey, please give me all of the dimensions that you can. And we can be as specific or as loose as we want to, but we can place these dimensions on all sides of our model after I give it just a direction. I want to say, hey, my building is at an angle. But in a single click, I've dimensioned what could easily take 1,000, not 1,000, maybe I'm exaggerating, but a lot of clicks. And I can always refine this to be what I want to be, right? Right now, we're looking at a specific tolerance. We can change that tolerance to fit any of my needs, right? And a large part of how that plays out, once again, is in the settings, right? So right now, if I have my floor plan set up so that they play out at a 64th, I can always change that, right? So I can update it in one place, and then every drawing that is now using this, and what I'll do is name it this so that we can override it. Oops. Let me just make one change here. I didn't mean to do that. So we can do this so that we overwrite that there. And it's going to say, hey, do you want to override it? And then every drawing will then update with that information, right? So even the intelligence of the model, keeping our components in place is always felt for me. And when it comes to my model here, now, this is just a matter of our layers that are coming on, right? So in my elevation view, once again, just talking about updates, we have a layer combination. If I want that general 3D layer just to never come on again when I'm in elevation, what I could do is turn it off, update the layer combination, and then everywhere that is, it will not show, right? So a lot of information that we can have. And even when we're annotating, I don't want you to get the idea that you have to lose your way of thinking. You can always add your own labels, right? But the importance of building with the intelligence and BIM and all the information that we get is that I can pull out information, right? So as opposed to me just saying that's brick, I could perhaps attach what is called an associative label to this that will always tell me either what I want. Right now it says masonry based off of that surface. We can have it show just brick. And so here's the beauty, right? What if that wall changes? Maybe it's a siding wall, it's going to update that information everywhere, right? So really making us intelligent in our annotation. IDs, that's a place where there's a lot of room for error. Did I remember, did I remember to actually include the correct ID or update my label when I change my window, right? So I can always use this so that it automatically picks up the information from that one, right? So let me go and grab my favorites here. And that's one window, but then maybe you're doing a whole elevation that would be individual placements. I can also say label everything about this. So it's really making it so that, yes, you're still going to have all of the complexity that you want in designing any of these elements. But when it comes down to it, we can take these labels that can pick up information. We can have control over how they appear. You don't have to always use them exactly how they appear. But in this particular instance, I'm changing what's called like a surface label, a skinless label, and I can, turn off the frame, lines and stuff. And so all of the information that we want to add, we can change that. We can always change that. But we are more efficient in the information that we output very quickly here. And so, if we could just go and kind of see where we're headed with all of this in our design, the fact that my sets are developing, the place where we spend most of the time, it goes a little bit like this in traditional 2D workflow. Lee, give me a basic elevation. All right, Lee, give me a basic plan. Let's get the client to sign off. And there's all these small incremental steps. And then when it comes to construction documents, that's when we're throwing it in and we're like, okay, here we go. And that's where we spend most of our fee and most of our project time. In BIM, I am front loading this project. I'm building this model up front. But when it comes to construction documents, I'm already, I don't know, 60, 70% of the way through of the information that you would have to go about building individually. We haven't even touched an RCP plan, but some of the benefits, you'll notice when I'm in RCP, well, it says, well, you only want to you don't want to see the openings for this. So it takes that information out. It gives you the relevant information that you need for the particular plans that you may be looking at, right? In our drawings, there's section markers, and we could talk all about that. And I'm going to get there in a moment. And we can turn on color in these drawings that automatically exist. That's another place where maybe you want to render this and show this specifically. 2 clicks, and I can show you, the information that becomes available. We haven't even built a section, but they are developing in the background, right? Those massing elements. Once again, I could come here even while I'm in this layout book. And I've done this on purpose, just so you know, they don't always automatically have to be on here, but I can update it in one place. Give it a second to update. These are going to be updating everywhere. So you can always go back to my source drawing views, right? So right now we're looking at the source drawing. We could go back into our sheet. It's going to update just to say, okay, that's not the information that's available. This is where we become more and more efficient with BIM. And once again, all of the schedules that are available, right? We haven't even touched on this. We haven't even got into this, but we have our window schedules. We have our door schedules that are being populated that we can add and take more information from, right? And we have only scratched the surface. I've had about, a little over an hour here, and there's always more that we can say about this. But, our zone names, they'll pick up our zones, they'll pick up the area, right? If I place a toilet, and I know this is not where it's supposed to be, but just for the sake of time, I have a schedule that'll tell me, okay, you have something in that room right now, and it's called Object 1. We can place a picture, but it's always updating all of that information. We can change that ID, all of that information, and kind of drive this model. So the last thing I want to show you, and then I want to open it up for questions here. One of these exports here is BIMX. This is our mobile platform where you can export to a phone or tablet, either for you or your client, to help you explore this. So I just want to bring up connecting to my tablet, if you give me a moment here. So I'll connect it up to my tablet here. One second. We bring it up. And so this is our app, BIMX. And after all that work you've done at any point in the process, it also keeps you portfolio ready. We're building this model. We're going to need to present it, or maybe you use it internally for redlining. But what you'll recognize is that all of the information that I put in, I'm also able to get out, right? So for instance, any model that I go into, I can start to see cutaway views that I set up views for living room and dining room, perhaps, if that's what you're looking at, preset views that we go into. But just to give you a preview of this, and if it's a delay, it's because of GoToWebinar. So I do encourage everyone to download it on their own. But at any time, you can export to BIMX. And it gives me my model so that as I am, working through these, right, when that client says, make this change and then show me, I am going to change it. And it is going to change in the documentation. But I also have this device. And so in some cases, this is replacing renderings for some. It's not a rendering, and once again, as far as quality, I do encourage you to see it on your own because, just over the network, it is a little bit delayed and looks a little bit differently. But I can push and pull in terms of like zoom around my model. I can go into this first person mode, and essentially it comes down to what you want to model. And that's just one thing I want to mention is your model is only intelligent as you want it to be. So this idea, this myth that in BIM, it's got to be everything or nothing. It could be whatever you design. You can draw very schematic like we just showed you, but this model, I get so much information, or perhaps I want to show this to the client and show them, without the finishes, talk about them without them getting into the very specifics of the project, which we know they often do. But what's also here is the linking to the documentation. So that's what you see with these floating blue hyperlinks. And so these actually lead to some of the documents, and we can turn them off, right? I have them on by default, but if you just want to explore, you can. I'm in the kitchen, so it says, oh, take me to a kitchen elevation, and then it's going to zoom to that portion in your document set. So this is one of the bonus things, which is really great because I'm going to export this to this format like I do a PDF. You're going to build that model. All of the linking and elements that you add in are done because, you have added that information. So it really just makes us more efficient. And all of this is geared towards delivering a better experience for our clients. Perhaps understanding the 3D in juxtaposition with the 2D is a great way for them to understand your project a little bit better. So I want to open it up a question. I'm just going to show a couple of projects in the background. But your project once again will be as detailed as you make it. This particular house, I've turned on something called my cutaway planes, where if you want to just understand the building a little bit better, you can always cut into it. This is a client that builds everything, right? So that means when it comes time to look at a 3D detail, everything is in there already. And that last wall type we didn't talk about, complex profile, that means you can draft in 2D and extrude in 3D and add that into your model. All of that information is always there. Um, Project scale wise, we can work with towers. Even the fact that I have 5 of these open right now, a lot of people don't talk about hardware enough. The computers they're going to need in order to run this. And I'm on a MacBook Pro. I have my documentation here, and it's just definitely making us more efficient in everything that we do. So I see a question here that would come up just about graphic overrides. And that was just one of the things I want to mention. Right now, this is a graphic override, one that says, hey, turn all of the walls gray, but make the electrical symbols bold. So that information is always available. Now, what I do want to do here, just while you're asking questions, if there is anyone who needs those AIA credits, please enter them in the dialog box now, if you haven't already. But please be sure to add that information so that you can get your CEU credits. Also, just before anyone leaves, the next the next webinar, and also this ALA promotion. If you have any questions, Eric's on the line and can answer them. But our next webinar is October 29th. And so I want to thank you for joining. And now we'll have Vincent Boutal actually answer some of your questions for you as well.